Elena Morrison had been working as a flight attendant for 18 years. She thought she had seen it all: eye-bars, medical emergencies, marriage proposals. She had even witnessed a birth over the Atlantic once. But she had never found a suicide note at 35,000 feet. It was Tuesday night, a night flight from New York to Seattle. There were no other passengers, except for one in first class, seat 2A. An elderly man, around 65 years old, wearing an expensive suit that was too big for his thin frame. Elena had noticed him boarding the plane, the trembling of his hands as he handed over his boarding pass, ordering whiskey 3 times within the first hour, staring out the window into the darkness with the vacant gaze of someone who had nothing left to lose. She had seen that look before. 5 years ago, she had seen it in the mirror while standing on the balcony of her 8th-floor apartment. At midnight, Elena went to collect his dinner tray. That's when she saw it. White airplane paper, shaky handwriting. It was next to an empty whiskey glass and a medicine bottle. To whoever finds this, I'm sorry. By the time you read this, Senator Richard Harrison will be dead. Elena's hands trembled as she picked up the note. She looked at the passenger. His eyes were closed. The medicine bottle in his lap was almost empty. She touched his shoulder. His eyes opened, gray, tired. When he saw what she was holding, something like relief crossed his face. "You found it," he whispered. Elena should have called for help, should have alerted the captain, should have followed every protocol she'd been trained on. Instead, she sat down in the seat across from him and said one word: "Why?" Senator Richard Harrison stared at her for a long moment. Then he began to talk. He'd been a United States Senator for 22 years, respected, powerful, a man people listened to. He had a wife named Sarah, married 38 years. 3 children, David, Rachel, Thomas, a brownstone in Manhattan, a legacy he was proud of. 3 months ago, a journalist published leaked emails. They made it look like Richard had accepted bribes from a pharmaceutical company. The truth was more complicated. The emails were real, but taken out of context, part of a legitimate investigation he was conducting into drug pricing. But explanations don't matter when you're front-page news. His party abandoned him within 48 hours. His colleagues pretended they'd never known him. The media destroyed him. His approval rating dropped from 63% to 11% overnight. His wife filed for divorce the following week. Then came the doctor's appointment. Pancreatic cancer, stage 4, inoperable. 4 to 6 months. The oncologist delivered the diagnosis on the same day Richard's lawyer served him with divorce papers. He sat in that sterile office, looking at scan results showing tumors spreading through his body, and thought, what's the point? His children wouldn't take his calls. His son David sent a single text: "You embarrassed us. Don't contact us again." His daughter Rachel blocked his number. His youngest, Thomas, didn't respond at all. Richard Harrison had nowhere to go, no one to talk to. Everyone he'd called a friend for decades suddenly couldn't remember his name. So he booked a flight, red-eye to Seattle, first class, empty. He bought 60 sleeping pills from 3 different pharmacies, and he planned to take them all somewhere over the Pacific, where nobody would find him until it was too late. Elena listened to all of this in silence. The cabin was empty. The darkness outside was complete. Just her and the stranger with death in his eyes. When he finished, she asked him about his wife. Richard's face softened. Sarah was beautiful, he said. Smart. They'd met in law school. She was the best thing that ever happened to him. "Did you love her?" Elena asked. "With everything I had," Richard whispered. "That's why it hurts so much." Elena asked about his children. David was a lawyer. Rachel was a doctor. Thomas taught music. All brilliant, all successful, all convinced their father was a criminal. Do they know about the cancer? Richard shook his head. They wouldn't answer his calls, so they'd find out when it was too late. Elena sat with that for a moment. Then she told him something she'd never told anyone at work. 5 years ago, she'd stood on her apartment balcony, looking down at the street 8 floors below. Her marriage had just ended. Her ex-husband had been emotionally abusive, had isolated her from everyone, had convinced her she was worthless. She'd been ready to jump. Then her phone rang. Her sister, someone she hadn't spoken to in 2 years because her ex had made her cut contact. Her sister called just to say she loved her. Elena stepped back from the edge. "What stopped you from jumping?" Richard asked. "Knowing someone still cared," Elena said simply. They talked for hours about Richard's career, the bills he'd passed, the communities he'd helped, about Elena's job, the places she traveled, the passengers who'd become friends. Somewhere over Montana, as dawn began to break, Richard picked up the pill bottle and handed it to Elena. "Take these," he said. "I don't trust myself." Elena took the bottle. It was heavy in her hand. "What changed your mind?" she asked. "You did," Richard said. "You reminded me there's more to life than what I've lost." When they landed in Seattle, Richard asked for Elena's phone number. She wrote it on a napkin. 2 days later, he called. "I contacted my children," Richard said. "Left voicemails, told them about the cancer. I don't know if they'll call back, but at least I tried." He was still in Seattle. He asked if she wanted coffee. Elena said yes. They met at a cafe near Pike Place Market. Richard looked better. He'd slept, showered, was wearing clothes that fit. They talked for hours about everything, about nothing. Over the next 2 weeks, they saw each other every day. Coffee, dinner, walks along the waterfront. Richard told her about his first campaign, about believing he could change the world. Elena told him about her dreams of becoming a pilot, about her fear of starting over at 45. "You have 20 years of flying ahead of you. Don't let fear stop you," Richard said. On the 3rd week, Richard got a call from his daughter Rachel. She'd gotten his voicemail about the cancer. She wanted to see him. Rachel flew to Seattle 3 days later. Richard was terrified. What if she just wanted to yell at him? What if this was her chance to say everything she'd been holding back? Elena found him afterwards, sitting on a bench near the waterfront, crying. "She forgave me," Richard said. "She looked into the scandal, read the full emails, realized I was telling the truth. She apologized for not believing me." Rachel was an oncology doctor. She wanted to review his treatment options, see if there was anything that could extend his time. "She said she wants whatever time with me she can get," Richard whispered. Elena took his hand. 2 weeks later, Rachel called with news. There was a clinical trial, experimental treatment for pancreatic cancer. Brutal chemotherapy, terrible side effects. But patients had extended their lives by 12 to 18 months, some longer. Richard looked at Elena. "Do you think it's worth it?" "Yes," Elena said. "Every extra day is a day we get together." Richard enrolled in the trial. The first round of chemo hit him hard. Elena held him while he'd throw up, helped him shower when he was too weak to stand, slept in a chair beside his hospital bed during the worst nights. His son David came to visit during the 3rd round. Stiff at first, uncomfortable, but he apologized, said he should have given his father a chance to explain. They cried together, began to rebuild. Thomas, the youngest, took longer. But 6 weeks into treatment, he showed up with his guitar, played for hours. Folk songs, classical pieces, silly songs from Thomas's childhood. "I missed this," Richard said. "I missed all of you so much." Through it all, Elena was there, not as a flight attendant, not as a casual friend, but as his partner. Richard moved out of his hotel and into Elena's apartment. It was small, cramped, compared to what he was used to, but he didn't complain. "This is the happiest I've been in years," he told her one night. The clinical trial worked better than anyone expected. After 6 months, Richard's tumors had shrunk by 40%. After 9 months, he was in partial remission. "I don't understand," his oncologist said. "This is extremely rare." "I have a reason to live," Richard said. But they knew it was temporary. Cancer like his doesn't disappear. It waits. It hides. It comes back. 14 months after that night on the plane, Richard's cancer returned. Aggressive, resistant to treatment. The drugs that had worked before did nothing. 2 months, maybe 3, the doctor said. Richard took the news with surprising calm. "I got 14 months I wasn't supposed to have. 14 months with you, with my children. That's more than I planned for when I got on that plane with a bottle of pills." They decided to make those last months count. Richard reconciled fully with all 3 of his children. David brought his kids, grandkids Richard hadn't seen in years. Rachel took a leave from her practice to spend time with her father. They met at a cafe. Elena stayed away, giving them privacy. When Richard came home, he was crying. "She apologized," he said. "She should have believed me about the scandal. Should have given me a chance to explain." "What did she say?" Elena asked. "I told her I forgave her, that I didn't blame her. Because if she hadn't left, I wouldn't have been on that plane. And if I hadn't been on that plane, I wouldn't have met you." In his final weeks, Richard wrote letters to each of his children, to his grandchildren, to friends who'd stood by him and friends who'd abandoned him. And he wrote one to Elena. "Don't read it until after," he said, handing her the sealed envelope. "I promise. And Elena, when I'm gone, I don't want you to mourn forever. Promise me you'll live." Senator Richard Harrison died on a Tuesday morning in October, 16 months after the night Elena found his suicide note. He wasn't alone. His children were there. Elena was there. Even Sarah came to say goodbye. His last words were, "Thank you for the second chance." Elena waited 3 days to read the letter. After the funeral, after everyone had left, after she was alone in the apartment that still smelled like him. The envelope was thick. 3 pages in Richard's handwriting, shaky from medication, but still legible. The letter started simply. "My dearest Elena, if you're reading this, I'm gone." Richard wrote about dying loved, about reconciling with his children, about apologizing to his ex-wife, about spending 16 months with the most incredible woman he'd ever known. He wrote that most people don't get that. Most people die with regrets, with unfinished business, with words left unsaid. He died at peace because of her. Then Richard told Elena what to do next. Live. Take pilot training, fly, see the world, find someone new to love. Don't let his death make her afraid to love again. Let it remind her that every moment matters. He'd set up a trust fund for her. Pilot training, full tuition, living expenses, everything she needed. "Don't argue with a dead man," the letter read. "Just take it and fly." He ended with a postscript. "That pill bottle you took from me on the plane, I had my lawyer destroy it, just in case you ever find yourself back on that balcony. You don't need those pills, Elena. You never did. You're stronger than you know." Elena cried for an hour after reading it. Then she called his lawyer. Then she enrolled in flight school. 3 years later, Elena Morrison got her commercial pilot's license on a Tuesday morning in October, 3 years to the day after Richard died. Her first solo flight was from Seattle to New York, the same route in reverse as the night they met. As she climbed to 35,000 feet, Elena thought about that red eye, about finding a suicide note in seat 2A, about the broken man who'd wanted to die, and the conversation that saved his life, about the 16 months that followed, the pain, the joy, the love. Richard was right. She did fall in love again. A fellow pilot she met during training. Someone kind and patient who didn't mind that she still kept Richard's photo on her nightstand. But Richard would always be special. The man who taught her that it's never too late for a second chance. That love can find you in the most unexpected places. That sometimes the person you save ends up saving you right back. As Elena leveled off and set the autopilot, she touched the small wings pin on her uniform, a gift from Richard's children, after she got her license. "Thank you," she whispered to the empty cockpit, "for everything." And somewhere, she liked to imagine, Senator Richard Harrison was smiling. 3 years to the day after Richard died, Elena Morrison sat in the cockpit of a Boeing 737, completing her first solo flight as a commercial pilot. Seattle to New York, the same route, in reverse, as the night that changed everything. She'd done it, gotten her license, fulfilled Richard's dream for her. But as she guided the plane through the clouds at 35,000 feet, Elena realized something. This wasn't the end of Richard's story. It was just the beginning of how his legacy continued to shape her life. The first year after his death had been the hardest. Elena threw herself into pilot training, using the trust fund Richard had set up. Ground school, flight hours, written exams, simulator training. She studied until her eyes burned, flew until her hands ached, pushed herself harder than she'd ever pushed before. Not because Richard had asked her to, but because quitting would have meant his sacrifice. Choosing those last 16 months of pain and treatment had been for nothing. On days when she wanted to give up, when the physics of flight felt impossible, or when younger students made her feel ancient at 48, Elena would touch the small wings pin she wore, the one Richard's children had given her, and she'd remember why she was doing this. Rachel called her every Sunday. Richard's daughter had become more than just the daughter of the man Elena loved. She'd become family. "How's training going?" Rachel would ask. "Exhausting," Elena would admit, "but good. Dad would be proud." Those 4 words carried Elena through weeks of doubt. David, Richard's oldest son, helped in practical ways. He reviewed her lease agreement when she moved to a new apartment closer to the flight school, gave her advice on investing the remainder of the trust fund, invited her to family dinners. "You're not just Dad's girlfriend," David told her once. "You're part of this family. You saved him. You gave us 16 extra months we wouldn't have had. That makes you family." Thomas, the youngest, sent her playlists. Music for studying, music for flying, music for missing someone. They never forgot Elena, never treated her like their father's old fling. They adopted her into their lives, permanent and real. Sarah, Richard's ex-wife, reached out 6 months after his death. They met at the same cafe where Sarah and Richard had reconciled. Awkward at first. What do you say to your dead ex-husband's girlfriend? I wanted to thank you, Sarah said finally, for giving Richard peace, for helping him reconnect with our children, for making his last months happy instead of bitter. Elena didn't know what to say. I failed him, Sarah continued. I didn't believe him when he needed me most. I let fear and anger make my decisions instead of 38 years of knowing who he was. She wiped her eyes. But you didn't fail him. You believed in him. You fought for him. You loved him when he had nothing left. He loved you his whole life, Elena said quietly, even at the end. I know, and I'll live with the guilt of leaving him for the rest of my life. Sarah reached across the table and took Elena's hand. But I'm grateful you were there, that he didn't die alone and broken. Thank you for that. They met for coffee once a month after that. Not friends exactly, but connected through the man they'd both loved. Sarah told stories about young Richard, law school Richard, new father Richard, Senator Richard. Elena learned parts of him she'd never known, and in learning them, loved him even more. During her second year of training, Elena met Marcus Chen. He was an instructor pilot at her flight school. 43, calm, with the kind of steady presence that came from years in the cockpit. He noticed Elena struggling with crosswind landings one afternoon and offered extra practice time. You're overthinking it, Marcus said. Trust your instincts. Feel the plane. They flew together twice a week. Professional at first, then friendly, then something more. Marcus knew about Richard. Elena had been clear from the start. I loved someone who died, Elena told him on their first real date. I still love him. I always will. His picture is on my nightstand. His children are my family. If that's too complicated... It's not complicated, Marcus said simply. It's honest. You loved someone. He died. You're allowed to love again. Those things don't cancel each other out. Some people think you should move on, forget. Those people don't understand loss. Marcus had lost his wife to breast cancer 7 years earlier. He understood grief, understood that love doesn't end just because someone dies. They took things slowly. Coffee turned into dinners. Dinners turned into flights together on weekends. Flights turned into late nights talking about everything. Marcus never competed with Richard's memory, never asked Elena to choose. He simply existed alongside it, patient and kind. I like him, Rachel told Elena during one of their Sunday calls. Dad would like him too. You think so? Dad wanted you to be happy. Marcus makes you happy. That's all that would matter to him. 2.5 years after Richard's death, Elena passed her final exam and received her commercial pilot's license. The examiner shook her hand. Congratulations, Captain Morrison. Captain Morrison. The word sent chills through her. Richard's children were there when she received her official certificate. So was Marcus. So was Sarah. I wish Dad could see this, Thomas said, crying. He can, Elena said. I know he can. That night, Elena opened a bottle of wine, the same vintage Richard had ordered on their first dinner in Seattle, and raised a glass to his photo. We did it, she whispered. You and me. We did it. Elena's first job was with a regional airline, small planes, short routes. Not glamorous, but it was flying. Her first flight as a working pilot was Seattle to Portland, 30 minutes in the air, 47 passengers. Elena sat in the right seat, first officer, not captain yet, and felt the weight of responsibility settle over her. These people trusted her with their lives. The captain, a woman in her 50s named Patricia, glanced over. First day? First flight, Elena admitted. You'll do great, I can tell. You've got that look. What luck? Like you're flying for more than just yourself. Patricia was right. Elena was flying for Richard, for the man who'd believed in her when she didn't believe in herself, for the 16 months they'd stolen from death, for every passenger who boarded her plane, trusting her to get them safely home. 6 months into her new job, Elena received a call from Richard's lawyer. Ms. Morrison, I have something for you. Senator Harrison left specific instructions to be carried out 3 years after his death. What kind of instructions? You'll need to come to my office. Elena met the lawyer the following week. He handed her an envelope, thick, like the letter Richard had left her before, but this one marked to be opened exactly 3 years after my death. Inside was another letter and a check. The letter explained that Richard had set aside additional funds, not for Elena directly, but for a foundation, the Richard Harrison Second Chances Foundation, dedicated to suicide prevention and supporting people with terminal illnesses. I want you to run it, Richard's letter read. Use my money to help people like me, people who've lost hope, people who need someone to sit down and say, tell me why. You saved my life, Elena. Now help me save others. The check was for $2 million, seed money for the foundation. Elena stared at it, crying. She called Rachel. Did you know about this? Not the details, but Dad mentioned wanting to do something meaningful with what was left, something that mattered. Elena hired a board, found office space, partnered with hospitals and mental health organizations, created a hotline staffed by volunteers trained to listen, really listen, the way Elena had listened to Richard. The foundation launched on what would have been Richard's 66th birthday. In the first year, they helped 300 people. Some got mental health treatment, some connected with support groups. Some simply found someone who cared enough to listen. 17 people specifically mentioned that the hotline had talked them down from suicide. 17 lives saved because Richard Harrison chose to live. On the 4th anniversary of Richard's death, Elena flew a special charter flight. A private plane, just one passenger, Rachel, David, and Thomas Harrison. Flying to Montana, the place where, on that red-eye years ago, Richard had decided to keep living. They scattered some of his ashes over the mountains. Not all. Most were buried with him, but a small portion, released at 35,000 feet, drifting down toward the land that had witnessed his choice. Thank you, Dad, Rachel whispered as Elena kept flying steady and straight. Thomas played guitar in the back of the plane. David cried silently. Elena kept her hands on the controls and her eyes on the sky. After they landed, the 4 of them sat in a diner, drinking terrible coffee, sharing memories. He talked about you constantly those last months, David said, about how you saved him, about how meeting you made everything worth it. I didn't save him, Elena said. I just listened. That's what saved him, Rachel replied. Someone finally listened. Marcus proposed on Elena's 50th birthday. Simple, quiet. In her apartment, with Richard's photo still on the nightstand. I know you'll always love him, Marcus said. I'm not asking you to stop. I'm asking if there's room in your heart for me too. There is, Elena said, crying. There's so much room. They married 6 months later. Small ceremony. Richard's children were there. Sarah sent flowers. The foundation board attended. Rachel gave a toast. To my father, who taught us that it's never too late for second chances. And to Elena, who believed in him when no one else did. Dad would be so happy to see you happy. Elena wore a small pin on her wedding dress. Wings. The ones Richard's children had given her. Something old, something new, something borrowed, and something to remember the man who changed everything. 5 years after Richard's death, Elena became a captain. Her own plane, her own crew, her own decisions. Her first flight as captain was deliberately New York to Seattle. Full circle. As she sat in the left seat, feeling the power of the engines, the weight of responsibility, the joy of finally being here, Elena thought about that night, about finding a suicide note, about a man who'd lost everything, about 16 months of love and loss, and learning that happiness can exist even in grief. The flight attendant came to the cockpit before takeoff. "Everything ready, Captain Morrison?" "Everything's ready," Elena said. And as the plane lifted into the sky, climbing toward 35,000 feet, Elena touched the wings pin on her uniform and whispered 4 words. "I did it, Richard." The foundation grew. 5 years, 10 years, helped thousands of people, saved hundreds of lives. Elena flew, captained planes across the country, saw the world from above, where everything looked small and manageable and beautiful. She loved Marcus, built a life with him, stable and kind and real. But she never forgot Richard. How could she? He was in every flight, every takeoff, every sunset at altitude. He was in Rachel's Sunday phone calls, in David's legal advice, in Thomas's playlists. He was in the foundation that bore his name, in the 17 people who didn't die because of the hotline, in every person who called and found someone willing to listen. Senator Richard Harrison had been powerful once. Then he'd lost everything. Then he'd found Elena. Then he died. But his death wasn't the end. It was the beginning of everything that came after. On what would have been Richard's 75th birthday, Elena flew to Montana again. Solo this time. Just her and the small plane and the mountains where he chose life. She climbed to 35,000 feet and leveled off. The sky was clear. Endless blue. Perfect. Elena took out a photo, the only one she had of her and Richard together, taken by Rachel during one of his chemo treatments. He looked terrible. Bald, thin, exhausted. But he was smiling, really smiling. And Elena, sitting beside him, holding his hand, looked happier than she'd been in years. "Thank you," Elena said to the photo, to the sky, to wherever Richard was now. "Thank you for teaching me that it's never too late, that love can find you anywhere, that every single day matters." She tucked the photo back into her pocket, next to her heart, and she flew. Because that's what Richard had wanted, for her to fly, to live, to love, to save others the way she'd saved him. Elena Morrison had been a flight attendant for 18 years before she found a suicide note at 35,000 feet. She'd been a pilot for 10 years since. She'd been changed forever by 16 months with a dying man. And she learned that sometimes the worst moments of your life lead to the best ones, that connections matter, that listening matters, that choosing to live, even when dying seems easier, matters. Richard Harrison died believing he'd lost everything. But he left behind a legacy bigger than his political career ever was. He left behind a foundation that saved lives. He left behind 3 children who learned forgiveness. He left behind an ex-wife who found peace. And he left behind Elena Morrison, who learned to fly. Not bad for a man who once planned to die alone over the Pacific. Not bad at all.